beyond bringing lager beer to St. Louis, what else did the Germans bring to town?
They brought a very fervent want for freedom.
For everybody.
For everybody. And they basically saved the St. Louis arsenal from being overtaken by Confederate forces.
I can dig that.
This is the Can You Dig It podcast. We crawl into the crypts, gardens, and forgotten cemeteries. Join Dan Fuller, your resident cemetery chronicler, and Joe Shields, the plot-loving development exec, as we unearth the dark secrets of St. Louis and Bellefontaine Cemetery and beyond. From garden geeks to history buffs with a taste for the macabre, as well as fans of iconography, this is your podcast. We love diving deep into the shadows of history. Let's dig in.
Can you believe it? We're here at season 3 of the Can You Dig It podcast.
I can. Welcome to season 3 of the Can You Dig It podcast. My name is Joe Shields. I'm the Director of Development for Bellefontaine Cemetery and Arboretum in beautiful St. Louis, Missouri.
And right next to him is Dan Fuller, the cemetery chronicler, also at Bellefontaine Cemetery and Arboretum. And today, because we are tackling a big topic, we are at the LRC, which is code for the Library Research Center of the Missouri Historical Society, and we drafted in some high-level guns on this topic in the form of Christopher Gordon. So welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for having us. We
Exactly.
kind of pulled into your neck of the woods. So we've had you on multiple times, and I will have to, for full disclosure, let everybody know that you are also a board member of Bellefontaine Cemetery and Arboretum. And for those listeners, if they'd like to use the Library and Research Center, how and when can they come?
So the Library and Research Center is free and open to the public. We are open Tuesday through Friday, noon to 5, and Saturday, 10 to 5. And we would love to have you come and do some research or just visit our facility.
I know one of the things that people love to come and do is do house research.
Yes, house research and genealogy are very popular activities for many people, but we also host historical scholars from around the world.
We're going to dive into the Civil War. And the Civil War in St. Louis is definitely a difficult topic, and it has lots of different facets and finesse to it. And so we're going to try and tackle it in a kind of a two-part situation. So we're going to start the Civil War in this particular podcast, and then we'll finish it up at the next one. But I always like to jump into the deep end of the pool, and so I'll ask both of you, did Missouri secede from the Union?
Well, yes and no.
Yeah, see? There we go.
I'm the same.
Technically, no. But at one point, the capital of Missouri was in Texas, so if that tells you anything.
Little disjointed. Yep.
Almost like a prairie dog coming up for a second and then just, coming back down.
I will tell you, I'm bringing this up because on tour, which you can do at Bellefontaine Cemetery and Arboretum, it's one of the first things that I do when we do a Civil War tour is I ask that question, and it is always a pregnant pause. Nobody wants to jump in on one side or the other. And 90% of the time when somebody finally does say something, it's like, no, they didn't leave the Union. And I'm like,
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. So we had two governors. We had Claiborne Fox Jackson, who was basically voted in by the citizens of the state of Missouri, and Hamilton Gamble in the form of a provisional governor who was put in place by a group of men basically in the city of St. Louis.
So, Christopher, why did Missouri have two governors?
So Claiborne Fox Jackson is a member of something that was called the Central Clique. That is, they were the political heavyweights in the antebellum era in St. Louis, and they were a very pro-Southern, pro-slavery faction. He was elected, and then of course the war comes along, and to make a long story short, the Union forces managed to take control of the state. They run Jackson out. Along with the rest of the government. He takes the state seal with him, all that good stuff. And Lincoln appoints Hamilton Gamble as the governor in Jackson's place to take his place.
And as I always love to do now, we're going to pull it back just a little bit because that's right on the threshold of the Civil War. But leading up to it, and something we have very much in common here in St. Louis, is the Dred Scott case. It is a flashpoint from at least my perspective, and is what's going to set up those 4 years of civil unrest. And we have many connections to the Dred Scott case.
And just for our listeners, the Dred Scott v. Sanford case was a landmark decision by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1857. It was a 7-2 decision that was notably known as the worst decision the Supreme Court's ever made because of the ramifications.
Give him a little time.
To date, because the country had been, what I believe, barreling down to a flashpoint that I think the majority of people knew as the 1850s wound out that something was going to happen. Right. Temperatures were too high on either side, and we're coming off of a relatively weak president in James Buchanan, who some people would think that did more to inflame the situation nationally than to try to cure it.
Right. And at the center of this is the Missouri Compromise, which basically, when they cast that decision, overturned the Missouri Compromise, which some people will say was what had kind of kept us in equilibrium, but that was going to run out eventually.
And for those of you who may not be aware, the decision in 1857, Dred Scott v. Sanford, was about Dred Scott's right to be either an American citizen and enjoy the rights afforded to an American citizen or not.
Yeah, basically saying that he was a piece of
property. Right.
Exactly. And from our standpoint at Bellefontaine Cemetery, we have much of the legal wrangling that took place and the original owners of Dred Scott. Just so that everybody knows, Dred Scott is actually at Calvary Cemetery, the cemetery that's next to us. And then Harriet and both of their daughters are at Greenwood Cemetery, a predominantly African-American cemetery, also in what I consider the big triangle of cemeteries for St. Louis. Greenwood, predominantly African-American, Calvary, our archdiocese counterpart, and then, of course, Bellefontaine Cemetery.
But you have the Blow family, which is the beginning and the end of the Dred Scott story.
Peter Blow to Taylor Blow.
That's right.
So just to kind of kick it off, and I'll give it back. Peter Blow was the original owner of Dred Scott and brought Dred Scott to St. Louis by a unique passage from Virginia to Alabama to St. Louis. And it is in his liquidation of assets, Dred Scott, that Dred Scott has a new owner at that particular point in time. But he grew up with the Blow children, who will be so instrumental in those court cases that'll come down the line. And as I always like to point out on tour, that's 5 court cases. A lot of people think it's a court case, but it will, of course, terminate with the Supreme Court. But it began here in St. Louis in our green domed building, which is now a part of the Arch grounds.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, would you agree that that decision by the Supreme Court is ultimately what set the stage for the conflict?
Well, it was one.
It was one of them.
It was one of the flashpoints. You can't pinpoint one exact thing, but yes, it was one of the flashpoints.
For me, at least, there's nothing more poignant than going down to our old courthouse and you see the statue of Dred and Harriet Scott looking out over, again, what's now the Arch grounds. But the fact that initially in the court cases that are held here in St. Louis, they secured their freedom. At least Dred did. And this is where it really gets interesting, because there were actually 2 cases. There was one for Harriet and for Dred. And the legal wranglers actually decided that they thought I had a better chance with the Dred case. And now legal scholars of today think that maybe they would have had a better chance if they chased Harriet's case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was this long legal tradition in Missouri that, and it actually goes back to common law and Virginia law and things like that, that if you can prove your freedom, you're always free. And this was becoming murkier, not because of judges were, the older judges were not following that trajectory. It's that the politics in this country had changed, that they turned the Supreme Court justices in Missouri to elected officials. So before that, you were appointed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like any Supreme Court justices. But at one point in the 1840s, suddenly they're politically elected. They were gaming the system, basically. The pro-slavery groups were gaming the system. And so that is one of the reasons why that whole attitude changes, and they overturn like 28 years of legal precedent where if you were free, you were always free.
Right. And St. Louis was a hotbed of this. And I know that Christopher Gordon is a very sharp detective here, because I know he's working on a number of these cases right now. So he's very aware of what took place. But this was the case that everybody put everything onto. And when this case goes to the Supreme Court, it is a flash. But before we get too much further, what I do want to point out is, at least again in here in St. Louis, is what will come up in the opening salvo of the Civil War, the Camp Jackson affair here in St. Louis. And as I always like to point out, the first fatalities of the Civil War here in St. Louis were actually civilians.
Just try to put yourself, our listeners, I'm going to just try to set something up for you here. Just try to put yourself in the spirit of the time. You live in a state that is completely split down the middle. And as I said before, everybody had to have a feeling that there was going to be a flashpoint of some kind. And Chris, you said something just a minute ago about the politics in the country had changed. Have either of you tried to muddle through any of the court decisions, the lower court decisions, as Dred Scott made his way to the Supreme Court?
Oh, yeah. I mean, as I said, there was this tradition of it respecting that right of freedom. And in his early court cases, he won.
Right.
And so it's not it's after, again, they game the system and they change change up the judges that he loses.
Well, I mentioned this because I tried to muddle through the circuit court decision in 1856, 1 year before the Supreme Court decision. And it was interesting. Of course, I didn't read all of it because it's 29,161 words. But it's interesting to see how they carefully wordsmithed their way to try to, I think, appease everybody. Mm-hmm. Try to appease everybody on either side.
Yeah, it's that waffling. And you drew a line before, and I was kind of drawing the wavy line as far as it was not a straight line through the state of Missouri as far as free or slave. It was really the city of St. Louis became this island in an otherwise secessionist state.
Right.
And so in St. Louis, they had to make some hard decisions. As I always like to say, they kind of went door to door, especially at the beginning of the Civil War, and basically said north or south. And if you said north, they had the oath of allegiance for you to sign. If you said south, they were giving you a steamboat ticket out of town.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Gamble wrote the dissenting opinion on that Supreme Court, in Missouri Supreme Court.
Yeah,
right.
2-1.
Yeah,
he's the only one that voted correctly.
Yeah.
And so, see, we're very detailed in this aspect, and so there's a lot of stuff that we need to clear up. In St. Louis, the original aristocracy of St. Louis is French and Spanish, and there had been, since the Americans came here in 1804, slavery. But now in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s, we're getting these heavy influx of immigrants. A big group of those would be the Germans. And the Germans had a disdain for the institution of slavery. And that is what kind of helps hold the reign here. But again, something else that we'll discuss is that military presence that's here in St. Louis. People forget about basically the bishop in the room, and that's going to be what was Jefferson Barracks, and a very important military presence in our old arsenal. And when we come back, we'll talk more about that.
This episode is brought to you by the Friends of Bellefontaine Cemetery. There's something truly special waiting to be discovered at Bellefontaine Cemetery and Arboretum. From remarkable history and beautiful landscapes to the stories of the people who helped shape St. Louis, it's a place that inspires every visit. The Friends of Bellefontaine Cemetery is a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving this treasured landmark and connecting our community with its rich history and natural beauty. Whether you're a history buff, a nature lover, or simply looking for a meaningful way to give back, you're invited to be part of something lasting. Visit friendsofbellefontainestl.org to learn more, explore upcoming events, and discover how you can get involved.
All right, so we're back from our break, and I just wanted to remind everybody we have our friend Christopher Gordon here with us here at the Library Research Center of the Missouri Historical Society. And of course, I'm also here next to my friend Joe Shields.
I am blessed to be here today talking about the Civil War, one of my favorite subjects of history because of just the gravity of what happened, the politics that leads up to it, and still some of the residual effects that we feel today from it.
Yep. And again, just to put people into perspective, you really didn't know who you were standing next to as far as where they might have believed. We were talking a little bit about, the military right before the break, and the fact that we had a very strong presence here. And right at the beginning salvo of the Civil War, we had a Camp Jackson, which is basically St. Louis University today, and that was an outpost of secessionists where just up the street, in my mind at least, at Fairgrounds Park was a group of Union loyalists. And in the Camp Jackson affair, which will happen in May of 1861, St. Louis is going to draw the line and say which side of the conflict we're going to be on.
Yeah, and it's, that is one of these interesting cases where you see military action and the civilian population, and it's just, everyone comes together. And so you have Jackson's supporters, Claiborne Fox Jackson's supporters, gathering on the campground, which they were trying to present themselves as not being anti-union. They were trying to more or less disguise that, even though at the same time they were ordering artillery from Louisiana and things like that to smuggle into the city. And the Union forces are getting really nervous about this. William Harney, who was the original federal commander here, he leaves and control is given to Nathaniel Lyon. Lyon decides to basically try to get ahead of this, and he leads troops, a lot of Germans.
Yeah.
And then they surround Camp Jackson.
And again, just to put people into context here, we're talking about a lot of non-English speaking Germans, and so there's this whole aspect of trying to put things into a military order, and so it is just this pot ready to boil over. And what will happen after the secessionists actually concede and are being marched to the arsenal to sign the oath of allegiance, shots are fired. All heck breaks loose, and at the end, when the smoke clears, there's 30 civilians who are fatalities.
Thomas Aaron, Frederick D. Allen, Jacob Carter, John Ingram.
And at Bellefontaine Cemetery, just to kind of loop it back in, we have 3 individuals who were there at Camp Jackson who expired from their wounds. And it wasn't just one incident. Over the course of the next month or so, there'll be other ruckuses that will take place. There'll be other fatalities as, again, St. Louis is basically putting up the invisible fence to say that we're a Union enclave, and then the rest of the state kind of goes whichever way it wants to.
And, I think it's interesting of why those civilians died, why they were caught in the crossfire. So some of them there were to, quote unquote, protest, or show their support one side or the other. But this was also like an exciting event. And so people got in their carriages and they went out there to witness it. And interestingly enough, one of those who came out to witness it with his son, took his son with him, is William Tecumseh Sherman, who was living in St. Louis at the time. And then when all heck breaks loose, as you say, he talks about grabbing his son and throwing him into a ditch and jumping on top of it.
Bullets flying overhead.
There's bullets flying everywhere, and at least one of the casualties was like a 14-year-old girl who had come out to watch the parade, excitement, the parade and so forth. A very similar thing happens at Bull Run outside of Washington,
with people
D.C.
spectating. Yeah.
They decide, we're going to go out and watch the battle, and then they of course get caught
in the middle
in the crossfire as well. So it was a common thing.
Yep.
People thought that this was going to be a gentleman's war or something that was short-lived, but until Shiloh. Shiloh was the first instance of, oh my God, this is brutal. This is warfare.
Yeah.
I think the best way to kind of describe this is the fact that you basically have a column of secessionist troops, the Southern Alliance, we'll say, marching with Union troops on both sides, and they have different factions on both sides of the road yelling and screaming back and forth whatever they might believe in at that particular point. And then, like I said, a shot is fired, and this is going to be one of those things that's never discovered. Who pulled the trigger? Who shot? Where did it go? But the Union troops who were keeping the secessionists in line returned fire. And who are they firing at? They're just firing into the crowd. They think they hear a pop there, they hear a pop there. And I can only imagine that those Southern troops just kind of huddle down at that particular place because they don't have arms at that point. So it's the Union and then the spectators. So what's going on?
So yeah, I mean, it's just a free for all, and these bullets are flying into the crowd, and once they do get things settled down, it remains a powder keg because I think you mentioned a few minutes ago, it's not an isolated incident. No. So you're going to have like street riots over the next few days, people who are still angry and resenting the Union presence and the whole, and the German thing, it goes deeper than just the German
disdain
to be
right.
anti-slavery. It's also the nativist thing too. These immigrants are coming into our city and they're trying to
shifting the power.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a very deep issue.
Yeah, another person I do want to mention who is shot in stray fire is Nathaniel Pratt. He was wounded on June 17th and then actually was laid to rest at Bellefontaine on the 18th. He was on guard as a police officer at one of our civil courts, and there is a ruckus, as we just said, a couple blocks away, and a shot went wild, and he was pierced into the chest by a mini ball that came from blocks away. Never even saw it coming. And so here's just this collateral damage, we'll say, of the beginning of the Civil War in St. Louis. Another name I want to throw out, just because, again, it's the boiling point, it's the beginning. A gentleman named Fremont didn't help matters here in St. Louis initially. In fact, he is somewhat credited with freeing some of the first enslaved in St. Louis, something that got ahead of Abraham Lincoln, and he'll have to eat a little crow after that.
Yeah, so John Fremont, who everyone knew by that point, he was the great pathfinder.
And he has a double connection back to Bellefontaine because he married Thomas Hart Benton's daughter, Jessie Benton. And so we, as I just pointed out, in a recent publication about Fremont, there are 2 Fremont children who are actually buried with us at Bellefontaine Cemetery. The Fremonts are, if nothing, one of the more interesting power couples of that time. And to put it into historic context, I mean, these are people who are getting newspaper coverage about what they have for breakfast. I mean, so.
Yeah, and Fremont, he comes from a really interesting background. He was actually raised in Charleston, South Carolina, which is, you would think he'd be pro-Southern, but he is not. He's actually very anti-slavery. But he wasn't particularly talented as a young man. He went to the College of Charleston, but didn't really make it through. His luck came with marrying the right woman, Jessie Benton, daughter of the Lion of the Senate.
Right. Thomas Hart Benton, a 30-year senator from the state of Missouri.
Yeah, and he uses those connections. He's, back in the 1830s, he catches the eye of Secretary of War John Robert Poinsett, who assigns him to the topographical engineers, and so it kind of kicks off his career. Joe, what is Joel Robert Poinsett's claim to fame?
I couldn't tell you.
So he was a minister to Mexico, where he was an amateur botanist, and he discovered the Mexican firebush. Joel Robert Poinsett.
Poinsettia.
He introduced
That's what I was
the
gonna say.
poinsettia to the United States. Anyway.
And we've never been the same since.
Tis the
Anyway,
season.
so he took a liking to Fremont and set him on a career as a surveyor. Goes out west, Mexican War, earns a reputation. 1856, he's the first Republican nominee for president. But when he is appointed to command of the army west of the Mississippi, his actions are not so brilliant.
He got himself into a lot of hot water, and Jessie had to actually come in and help.
That's right. Well, she tried to
She
help.
tried.
She tried. His anti-slavery views, he came in, he swept in, and he said basically all Missourians need to give up their slaves. And Lincoln just about had a heart attack because he was trying to make sure that Missouri stayed in the fold, which meant sometimes appeasing the enslavers here in the state. And so Lincoln was basically ready. Well, Lincoln wanted him gone. Jessie goes and pleads with Lincoln, but her pleas fall on deaf ears, and so he was discharged from his command.
You just can't quite get your handle on how bad it was in St. Louis. I mean, you went from one side to the other. The boat was rocking from one side to the other. And I think that it demonstrates in what I said at the beginning, did Missouri secede from the Union? And even still to this day, you get this pregnant pause when you ask that question because people don't really understand it. And it wasn't too long ago I actually approached my high school history teacher and said, hey, you didn't go into all this detail. I mean, it was much more complicated. He said the state gave us 2 weeks. So it's, we don't spend enough time on it. It's not black and white. It's shades of gray, and it's a very complex and complicated story. But we started it. It started. Part of it starts here in St. Louis with the Dred Scott case. And then we're going to have 4 years of just this knockdown, drag out, beat one another up. And there are a lot of individuals with us at Bellefontaine Cemetery that played a part and a role in that. So shots are fired at Fort Sumter in April of 1861, and that Camp Jackson affair that we are commenting about was May of that same year, 1861. So people are taking sides. People are putting themselves into whatever camp they wish to be in, felt comfortable in. And I'm sure, at least from the German standpoint, they're trying to figure out what's going on. I mean, they thought they left all of this behind, and now they crossed an ocean and have found themselves right in the midst of it again. And I think that's why they very quickly decided on what side they were going to be.
Yeah, and to me that says a lot of things, a lot about their dedication as Americans too, and this new country. I mean, they basically get off a boat from a revolution where they were fighting for democracy in the German states and sign up for a new cause, a new war in their new country to try to make it free for everybody, right? So I think it says a lot about their ideals.
Yeah.
And what they were willing to fight for. So yeah, that's a pretty amazing story just in itself.
For the Civil War, we are going to emerge a lot of new technology, and just even from that instance that we talked a little bit about as far as the Mexican-American War, now you do have telegraph capability, so we're not necessarily waiting for the written word to be transported from one place to another. It's coming not quite instantaneously, not necessarily like what we have today, but in short order. That information would be disseminated. It would go to the myriad of newspapers, especially here in St. Louis. I always forget what that number was. And of course, just like we have today, you have television stations and news organizations that lean one way or the other. Same thing happened with the newspapers. They would lean one way or the other. And so, as I always like to say, the well-learned person would know that you read both sides and then come up with your own conversation.
Yeah, almost every newspaper was an organ of a particular party, be it Whig or Democrats or later Republicans.
Later the Republicans. Yeah, and there's more to talk about. We'll be getting into a little bit more detail as we take people through the Civil War and to the end of the Civil War. And I think you might be surprised at some of the things that took place in the Civil War that we kind of take for granted today. like the Medal of Honor.
I can dig it.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. Also, please share this episode with your family and friends if you got value from the episode as well as the podcast. You can do it right from the platform you are listening on. Plus, take a screenshot and tag us and tag yourself. We are at Podcast Can You Dig It on Instagram. The Can You Dig It podcast is produced by Peace Off Productions and the Trevian Entertainment Group.